Shalom and welcome to Yeshiva B'nai Noach. I'm Tom Averna, and we're going to continue with our class on Messiah, Mashiach. In this class, we'll take a look at who the Messiah is and what his mission is. And in our last class, we read from Maimonides and his information on what details he had on who the Messiah will be, what he's expected to do. We'll take a further look into those two subjects using other sources as well in this class. And not all rabbis, by the way, are in agreement with Maimonides on every point, but no one else has put it together as completely as he has, as I alluded to in the last class. Maimonides had a little more to say about Messiah in his 13 Principles of Faith in the 12th principle. He states, quote, "I believe with complete faith in the coming of the Messiah, and even though he tarry, I will eagerly await his coming every day." These principles were compiled by Maimonides to represent the foundational beliefs required for the Jew. Again, not everyone agrees with these, but no one disagrees with their importance to Judaism. Rabbi Garari's book on the 13 Principles of Faith that Maimonides puts out, and as we talked about, the 12th principle of the Messiah. And Rabbi Garari has this to say regarding that 12th principle of faith. He says, Mashiach ought to be the focal point of our lives in this world, as it is not merely a detail that will come into being sooner or later, one we can manage without for a while. Instead, the advent of Mashiach is the ultimate purpose of our lives and of all creation. He also said Mashiach represents an age, the era of universal awareness, perception, and knowledge of God. And Mashiach will teach us Torah in a way of seeing and experiencing godliness firsthand. The glory of God shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see together that the mouth of God has spoken. That's from Isaiah 40, verse 5. Likewise, the earth shall be full of the knowledge of God as the waters cover the seabed, from Isaiah chapter 11, verse 9. And they shall no longer teach each man his fellow, each man his brother, saying, Know God, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest of them. Jeremiah 31:33. So we can understand how electricity works from observing its effects, even though we can't actually see a stream of electrons passing through a wire. Our understanding is, of course, limited to what we can deduce from the effects that we observe. And the same is true of Torah. So as we take a look at the information that we're about to take a look at, recognize that what we're seeing here is information about the effects, what's going to happen, what's going to take place. And again, a lot of this from the commentary from Rabbi Garari's book on the 13 Principles of Faith. By way of review, then, here are the main points Maimonides made about the Messiah. He is a Torah scholar and a king, demonstrates righteousness beyond others, teacher of righteousness, a warrior spiritually and physically, and he builds the temple in its place and gathers all of Israel together. As we look at who the Messiah is, we should notice that it's of little importance, actually. That's the difference between Greek and Western thought and Hebrew or Eastern thought. It has a lot more to do with the fact that the Greeks view the world through the mind, abstract thought, whereas ancient Hebrew thought views the world through the senses, concrete thought. So the Greek thought describes the objects in relation to its appearance, what it looks like, what form it will take. Hebrew thought describes objects in relation to its function. What is it going to do? What is the purpose? So the Greek culture describes objects in relation to the object itself, and Hebrew culture describes objects in relation to the Hebrew himself. Greek nouns are words which refer to a person, a place, or a thing. Hebrew nouns refer to the action of a person, place, or thing. So most of the emphasis on the Messiah is not on who he is, but on what he does. And that's a very essential point to keep in mind as we look at the Jewish concept of the Messiah. We're not looking for a particular person, although that is part of it, but we're looking for what that person is supposed to do. That when that thing is done, then that person becomes the Messiah. So that's the huge distinction here to make between Greek thought, which is what you and I are raised with, a Western thought, and an Eastern thought, which is what the prophecies of the Torah and Tanach about the Messiah are from that viewpoint. So therefore, we don't have many details about the Messiah's personal characteristics, and that's important to keep in mind as we continue looking here. As we go through this, there'll be a lot of repetition, but here, kind of in a nutshell, is what we know about Mashiach from Scripture. Ezekiel 37, verses 1 through 28 sums it up pretty nicely by saying that the tribes will be restored, Israel and Judah will be reunited, the temple will be rebuilt and last forever, and the world will know peace. Those are the primary components from Ezekiel 37 in talking about what the Messiah is going to do. The written Torah and Tanakh is our baseline. It is in the prophets and writings where we find the bulk of our information, but it often requires a deeper understanding of the text than you can get in a translation, and also the oral law. So since the Talmud is a compilation of all the major rabbinic comments and ideas related to Torah and prophets, this has to also be a major accepted resource, again, requiring deep study to glean the information. Finally, the third most important source of Jewish ideas is the mystical writings primarily from the Zohar, Kabbalah, and similar kinds of writings, and from those who study and are called the mystics in Judaism, who study the Zohar, who study Kabbalah. Other major accomplishments for Messiah that have been made known in those sources, both Jew and Gentiles will accept the Messiah. It's not going to be a secret that one side is going to get and the other side isn't. Everybody will accept who the Mashiach is. Jerusalem will be an acknowledged center of Torah learning for the entire world. So therefore, the world has to be acceptance of that. And finally, the evil inclination will no longer dominate us. That's taking a look at the big picture. Those are three of the things that are going to be very important to determine, this indeed is the Messiah because he's accomplished these things. So again, as we look at that, important to recognize that these are the major components that we will be looking for to determine who the Messiah is when the Messiah comes. And the reason why we can say in the past, those who have claimed to be Messiah are not, because they haven't done these things. Again, we'll talk a little bit about the idea of the second coming, but that's in Hebrew thought, in Eastern thought. There is no second coming. That's not the point. The point is a person gets the title when they do the job. When they do the job, not that they're going to come back and do it later. All right, so we'll take a look at that in a little more detail as we continue. Another way that we can get ideas about the characteristics of the Messiah is to look at past examples. Now, Judaism teaches that in every generation there was and is and will be someone who could be the Messiah should that generation prove worthy, and that's significant. So here's a list of some of those who have been identified by rabbis or the world as potential messiahs. They could have been messiahs. And so we look at why they were viewed as possible messiahs. Some of the big names from the past include Noah, the patriarchs, Joseph, King David, King Hezekiah, King Josiah. More recently, we have Jesus, we have Simon Bar Kokhba, we have Shabbatai Zvi. Again, these are all those who have either claimed to be Messiah or others have recognized as Messiah. And in modern times, we have the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Menachem Mendel Schneerson. So as we look at these people who have that potential, or at least have claimed to have that potential, we can look at what it is that they represented that made them or the world believe that they were possible messiahs for their generation. Having said that, let's take a look at some of the things we might learn from those that we named as possible messiahs, or those who made a difference in Israel. First of all, in terms of the patriarchs, we see that the patriarchs represent Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob embodied the three attributes of chesed, which is love or benevolence, gevurah, which is severity and restraint, and tiferet, harmony and truth. So those are things that we can look for in the Messiah in terms of attributes. Are they benevolent? Are they loving? Do they have a sense of justice? And that would be looking at the severity and restraint. Is there a desire in them to see justice in the world and in each individual person? The Messiah also invokes or evokes rather within individuals and the world a sense of harmony, a sense of the importance of truth. And so from Abraham, the Messiah should also be someone who loves people and gives to others generously. From Isaac, we see that the Messiah will hate sin, though loves the sinner, and demonstrates adherence to the laws and moral purity. From Jacob, then, he has a deep desire to know and teach truth and to help others find their way. He'll also have a deep desire for unity and community. And from Joseph, we can learn that the Messiah will be a natural leader and a wellspring of forgiveness. That's the crux of the story of Joseph, is his ability to forgive and his ability to have compassion. Also, that he'll be a lover of his fellow Jews. The fact that Joseph did what he did in bringing Israel and his brothers to Egypt and taking care of them, that's that attribute that we're looking for in the Messiah as well. From Moses, what do we learn? We learn that the Messiah will be known for his humility. He'll also have no idea, and this is kind of important to note too. The Messiah has perhaps, in most cases, has no idea that he is the Messiah. So I kind of say, when this subject comes up, if someone claims to be the Messiah, chances are they're not, because, again, until God says it's now time and the Messiah is to be brought forth, the Messiah probably doesn't even know that he is in that place. But the Messiah may even fight against being the Messiah for a time. He might, just because of the humility aspect, he might deny, of course I'm not the Messiah. But he will be a great prayer warrior and intercessor and a lover of Israel. Also, someone who is a teacher and supporter of Torah and the law. From King David, what do we learn? We show that the Messiah will have the ability to fight and win over evil forces. He'll be a warrior. He'll be one who, and not necessarily physically, although perhaps so, but not necessarily, but a spiritual warrior certainly. He may well be a Baal Teshuvah, which means that he's someone who wasn't raised observant. He wasn't raised, might not have even been raised as a Jew, but someone who has sinned grievously. There's the idea of the Messiah as a leper, that there could be something that he will, just as King David, again, sinned grievously and repented, and that's the key. That the Messiah will be a master of repentance. Another thing we know about the Messiah from King David is that he is a lover of music, and this is something that isn't a lot of time isn't spent on, but we'll talk about this in more detail because there's an interesting story from Hezekiah and that relates to this. From Hezekiah and his grandson Josiah, we may learn that the Messiah can overcome the evil of his parents. Both of them. Both Hezekiah and his grandson Josiah both had very evil parents, but they became very righteous people. So we'll talk more about that, these two, a little bit later on. But in case we don't get to it, a very important thing to know is that King Hezekiah was supposed to be the fulfillment of the Messianic hopes. All of the prophecies, please note, all of the prophecies in Isaiah that are used to portray someone else as the Messiah, but all of those prophecies were regarding King Hezekiah. Now, that's not to say that prophecies don't do double duty. They often do. But every prophecy that Isaiah spoke came to be in the form of King Hezekiah. So, in fact, prophecies about Hezekiah and later about his grandson Josiah as well. There's a rabbinic story, getting back to the idea of the music being part of who the Messiah is. There's a rabbinic story that God had said he wanted to announce Hezekiah as the Messiah. But the angels came to him. Again, this is all allegory. But the angels came to him and said that Hezekiah couldn't be the Messiah. Why? Why couldn't he be the Messiah? Well, the angel said he never composed even one song or psalm to God as David did. So again, this is an aspect of the Messiah that the rabbis talked about, that he is and will be a composer of music, a player of music. And that'll be an important attribute that, again, we often don't talk about in terms of recognizing who the Messiah is. We'll spend a little bit more time on that in a bit, dealing with that. Let's dive a little bit deeper now into what we have to expect from the Messiah according to the law and the prophets. He will be a scholar and teacher of Torah and righteousness. Isaiah 11:2 and Isaiah 53:11 talk about the Spirit of God shall alight upon him, a spirit of wisdom and insight, a spirit of counsel and valor, a spirit of devotion and reverence for God. Out of his anguish he shall see it. He shall enjoy to the full through his devotion. My righteous servant makes the many righteous. It is their punishment that he bears. He'll hate sin, but love the sinner. He loves justice, judges sin and injustice. As we said before, he'll be a musician. He demonstrates and teaches the power of song in prayer for perfect communication with God. So the idea that King David played the harp and the lyre, that's very important, and in many thoughts and ideas of who the Messiah is, they see that exact thing happening with the Messiah. So the Messiah will also play the harp and the lyre. But now we ask ourselves, and this is where it gets kind of fun, in today's time, we don't have a harp and a lyre that is a common instrument of play, and yet we do. These instruments are connected today with what? The harp. Remember that the harp was originally laid flat and called a harpsichord. From there it became the piano. But what about the lyre? What is the lyre? So looking at Daniel 3, verse 5, there's a very interesting verse there that says, when you hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, the zither, and the lyre. The word in Daniel for lyre is right here, kitaris. What does that sound like? Kitaris, a kitar, a guitar. So the lyre in today's time is the guitar. So again, interesting. What do we do with it? Just keep it in the back of our minds that the Messiah may be a musician. He may be one who plays the guitar or the piano or both, or some other instruments as well. So again, kind of a fun thought, but something that is definitely a part of prophecy of who the Messiah is, or at least what the Messiah's characteristics are. He'll also be a family man, born of a Jewish mother and father with children who will follow after him. Now, and this with the understanding that he may be about Teshuvah and may just come from a Jewish mother and not know, his father may not at least know that he's Jewish. I will deal with that in a little bit more detail. But at any rate, the basic idea is that he has a mother and a father. He has children. He's a human. That's who the Messiah is. We can look to Isaiah 11:1, Jeremiah 23, and also in Jeremiah 33, Samuel 7 and 12. We see Psalms 89, Hosea, Jeremiah, again Ezekiel, and also the Zohar. The Zohar says, the verses in these talk about a shoot shall grow out of the stump of Jesse, a twig shall sprout from his stock. Again, all of these verses deal with the Messiah as a human being, as a person who has a lineage and has an ancestry that can be traced and can be seen. So, also, see, a time is coming, declares God, when I will raise up a true branch of David's line. So he will reign as king, and he shall prosper, and he shall do what is just and right in the land. Also, the idea that he's a Baal Teshuvah, a sinner and a descendant of sinners. We see in that the examples of King David, King Hezekiah, King Josiah, all who committed sins but repented. They were masters of repentance and prayer, certainly. We see that in King David and the Psalms and in the story of Hezekiah. There's also an idea that the Messiah will actually be wiser than Solomon. And Isaiah, who was the prophet to Hezekiah, in Isaiah 52:13 says, quote, "Indeed, my servant shall be wise, be exalted, and raised to great heights." The Messiah, as we mentioned, will be unknown to himself. There is one in every generation. One of the ways that we know that is through the example of Moses. Moses had no idea he was the Messiah, that he was to lead Israel out, and he fought against it. So that's our example. We also see in Exodus 3:10, that's the story of Moses, but we can also see examples of this in the Zohar, in the Talmud, in various places in the Talmud, all of that dealing with the fact that the Messiah most likely is unknown to himself and that he exists in every generation. And the reason why that has to be true, that there's a Messiah in every generation, is that when God has promised that the Messiah could come before his time, in other words, before the year 6000, if Israel is ready. If that's the case, then there has to be a Messiah in every generation. Yes, God knows exactly when that time is, but the point is that in the idea of hope and giving us hope, if we know that that Messiah is there in every generation, someone who is ready and able to step into that position, then we also recognize that that one thing that we do right could be that thing that enables the Messiah to immediately appear. So that's the hope that we hold on to, and the reason why we know there's a Messiah in every generation. Okay, and then the other thing to note is the Messiah is humble, but humility doesn't mean that you are down on yourself. It is a more clear definition of humility is power under control. Again, we have the example of Moses, who was considered the most humble of all men, according to Torah, and yet, he was an extremely powerful person who stood against the most powerful man on earth at the time, the Pharaoh, and won. So again, the Messiah will be very powerful, but also very humble, and dealing with that knowing that is very important. The Messiah is not going to be arrogant, not going to be, and that's one of the reasons why the Messiah doesn't know necessarily that he's the Messiah. So if you have someone coming to you saying arrogantly, "I am the Messiah," then you have to really question whether or not this person has that kind of humility, that he would actually come to you and say that. Anyway, so that's another aspect of who the Messiah is to be. And then also, as we look at other characteristics we've talked about for the Messiah, a natural leader who draws others to him, so that the Messiah will be a charismatic person. Doesn't have to be a leader to begin with. In other words, the Messiah may not be drawn from someone who is already in a leadership position. Moses wasn't in that place. Moses was off tending sheep. when he was called. And that very well may be the same situation when the Messiah is actually called to take that position, to take that place, that he comes from a very unknown source in many cases. So that's a possibility. But immediately he will draw to him those that he needs to draw to him. Also, the idea of a counselor and a support for others. The Messiah is not going to be someone who's aloof, someone who doesn't seem to care about others and their problems and the things that they're dealing with. The Messiah will certainly be one who cares. And finally, here, what we're looking at, that the Messiah will be zealous for the law. And this is really this is really an important point, in that the Messiah isn't going to do away with the law. The Messiah may criticize the way the law is being performed in some cases, but he certainly would never, ever, ever advocate something that God says is eternal. He would not advocate for its overthrow or for its dismissal or for a new covenant to take place. That's not the job of the Messiah. The Messiah is to fulfill the covenant that already exists, that God has already made with Israel as well as with the world. So again, the Messiah will have that characteristic of being zealous for the law and an observer of the law in his, as part of his character. There are 3 places in the Talmud that the Messiah is actually named. And there's some discussion about that. What does that mean? Does that mean that that's actually his name? And the majority of consensus is no. It's, what does the name mean? That's what we're looking at. So the 3 names that the Messiah has been given: Menachem, which means consolation or understanding. That's an attribute of the Messiah. Shiloh is another name that has been used for Moses. So it represents the humility of Moses. Yinon, which is pure faith or kingship. And Chanina, I think I said there are 3 names or 4 names. Chanina, which represents intercessory prayer. So someone who will, just like Moses did, will stand in the gap between God and Israel when there's a need for that intercession. That's the Messiah's job, is to be that, again, in the same way that Moses was for Israel. The Messiah will be that as well. So again, we have these 4 names that have been again named in various places in the Talmud, but primarily we're looking at the attribute, not someone that comes up with that particular name. The other thing that I find interesting is to look at and this is something in my own thought process, but if we look at what the world expects from the Messiah, and I really see that the whole point of isms in our world today really have to do with our inner knowledge and desire for the Messianic age, for Messianism, the desire for the active effect of having the Messiah here. And that's what all of these other isms really are: capitalism, socialism, Zionism, all of these. The goal of each of these, even communism, to at least on the surface. And again, I'm not saying that any of these things are accurate or correct. I'm just saying that they all have a goal of bringing the world to a place of peace and prosperity. That's the initial goal. That's how an ism is sold to its people. Is that if we do this, if we have a system of capitalism, we're going to have a system of peace and prosperity. That's the goal, and the reason that we have that goal is because everyone recognizes that that's the goal of the Messiah. That's the goal of the Messianic age, is to have that time of peace and prosperity for all. So as we think about isms, as we fight over which is the best ism, recognize that none of them are the best isms, that the only best ism is the one yet to come related to Mashiach. The other interesting point, I mentioned this when we looked at the bibliography. Again, not going to spend a lot of time here, but interesting fact that there are two Messiahs, possibly even three. So we have Messiah ben Joseph, we have Messiah ben David, and there are those that believe that Moses himself will return, will come back and be the Messiah. Again, note though that Moses is not called the Messiah, but he could become the Messiah if he returns. So there's an element of possibility of return that is involved in Judaism, that a person who will become the Messiah could be someone who's already been here and returns. Okay, so that's there. That's a part of it. But that person is not the Messiah until they do return and do the things that the Messiah is supposed to do. So we see that. Ben Joseph, again, that's the most common understanding of the two Messiahs, not three, but the two, is Ben Joseph and Ben David. Ben Joseph, the idea of Ben Joseph being the Messiah is it seems very logical and very possible. If we think about the fact that we have in the story of Joseph in Genesis, the two brothers, Joseph and Judah, were really the two rulers in their time. Joseph was of course the one who provided for Israel, brought Israel to safety, but Judah was kind of the head of the tribes of Israel. So we see in that example two messiahs right there in Joseph and Judah. And of course Judah represents the Mashiach ben David, Messiah, and Joseph represents himself, Messiah ben Joseph. And also remember in the history of Israel, when Israel divided between Judah and Israel, who ruled most of the time in Israel, it was from the sons of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh. The main ruler over Israel were from the tribes of Joseph. So, and of course, the ruler in Judah was from the tribe of David. So all of that as an example, saying, yeah, there could possibly be two messiahs. How all of that works out is open to a lot of interpretation. But we do believe that Judaism does teach that Ben Joseph actually is present in every single generation, just as the Messiah is. But he would be represented by whoever the greatest tzaddik, whoever the greatest righteous person in that generation is. And the idea that Ben Joseph, and this is in prophecy, but the idea that Ben Joseph may be killed in the battle of Gog and Magog, that's part of the prophecy. He may or may not be killed in that battle. So there's two schools of thought. And again, recognize that with prophecy, and this is very important to understand, with prophecy, negative prophecies do not have to come true. They can be changed. Positive prophecies always have to come true. So if a prophet prophesies something that's negative, the fact that it doesn't come true doesn't make that person not a prophet. But if they prophesy something positive will happen and it doesn't happen, then that person is not a prophet. So those are the ideas to take a look at here in terms of who the Messiah is, and by virtue of their works and what's going on. Okay, and briefly the idea of Messiah ben Joseph added to that list. I put this slide in here, but it's not something that I think I'm going to spend much time on here, but I do want to, and all of this is from the book 50 Messiahs, and a look at the fact that in Israel or in Judaism, there have been 50 claimants to the role of Messiah. And this, so what I may do, and I think it'll be a good idea to do this later on, is to take a look at that book in more detail by itself and just talk about it, because he does give interesting details, and most of us probably have no clue. We're all pretty familiar with Jesus as a Messiah claimant, and also we're pretty familiar with Menachem Schneerson as a Messiah claimant in modern times. But the rest of these, and some of us may be familiar with Bar Kokhba, but at any rate, most of these people we have no clue, and yet people like Shabbatai Zvi and his follower Jacob Frank later on, these two made such a huge impact in Judaism that even reverberates today. So I definitely want to spend some time talking about these. But the idea here is that there have been many, many people who have claimed the title of Messiah. And many of them, like Simon Bar Kokhba, was well received by the major scholars, Torah scholars and rabbis of his day in the 2nd century, and had many miracles related to the things that he did in freeing Israel from Roman bondage. But the fact that all of these people are dead, or if you want to believe not dead but gone, then that eliminates them from the running until and if they were to come back. And the same is true for Menachem Mendel Schneerson, and this is something that's a little touchy today with the Chabad rabbis. Not all of them believe this, but they certainly all believe that their Rebbe could have been the Messiah of his generation. But some in the Chabad movement do believe that Menachem Schneerson will come back from the dead, or that maybe he never died. Again, we see lots of the echoes of what happened in the 1st century happening here, but that he will come back and will be announced as the Messiah. All right, so we'll take a look at these in more detail, but just know that they're out there, that there's more than just Jesus that have a strong claimant to have to the Messiah title, but they lost that for various reasons, not the least of which is that they're no longer here. And that's only among the Jews. There's certainly other faiths that have Messiah claimants. Just look at the idea of who the Buddha was, Muhammad, of course, Baha'u'llah, many other faiths that have central figures that in one way or another performed the role of a Messiah but didn't complete it. At least as far as Judaism believes it should be completed. So again, we'll spend a little bit more time on this book, The 50 Messiahs. I think you'll find that interesting, so kind of watch for that to come up. And just, again, another kind of review, since we dealt with this in our last class, but Maimonides 11:4 gives some very detailed information about what the Messiah's mission is and the characteristics are, that he'll be from the house of David, he'll be a student and scholar of Torah, he'll observe the written and oral laws, he'll compel all of Israel to do the same, he'll deal with problems related to observing the law and that exist within Judaism itself. He'll bring unity, and this is an important factor here, is that the Messiah will bring unity, not division, not a sword, but the Messiah's job will be to bring not only all of Israel together, but all of the world together in unity. He'll fight the wars of God, and he'll build the temple, and all of those things make him possibly the Messiah. But when he gathers all of Israel together, builds the temple, and restores peace to the world, definitely that person is the Messiah. So that's what Maimonides had to say, again, by way of review. So I want to conclude this particular class with some information about what the Messiah's mission is. And similar to what we did yesterday or last class with Maimonides, there's a lot of information here. So I'm going to go through it, recognizing that this is a video, that you can stop it, you can go back and listen and go over it. But I do want to go through this information and at least have you recognize it. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. This based on Torah and Tanach and other rabbinic sources. So the question is, what is the Messiah's mission? Well, quite simply, it is a mission impossible. So listen to that mission impossible theme playing in the background as we continue this. The second thing, part of the mission, is that he will lead all of the Jews and all of the world, actually, willingly and joyfully to observe the Noahide laws. Joel 3:1 says, "After that I will pour out my spirit on all flesh." Zephaniah 3:9, "For then I will make the peoples pure of speech, so that they will all invoke God by name and render service with one accord." Isaiah chapter 2, verse 2 says, "In the days to come, the mount of God's house shall stand firm above the mountains and tower above the hills," euphemism for being that they'll be towering above all the nations and all the other religions. "And all the nations shall gaze on it with joy." Micah 4:1 says, "And the many nations shall go and shall say, Come, let us go up to the mount of God, to the house of the God of Jacob, that we may be instructed in God's ways, and that we may walk in godly paths." Zechariah 14:9 says, "And God shall be sovereign over all the earth. In that day there shall be one God with one name." And the next thing is that the Messiah will lead Gentiles, again, as we said this about Jews, we also say this about Gentiles, that they will also be willingly and joyfully led to observe the Noahide laws. Next thing is that the Messiah will fight against and completely eliminate evil from the world. Big, tall order, but that's part of the Messiah's job. We see that in Ezekiel 37, verse 23. "Nor shall they ever again defile themselves by their fetishes and their abhorrent things and by their other transgressions. I will save them in all their settlements where they sinned, and I will purify them. Then they shall be my people, and I will be their God. My servant David shall be king over them. There shall be one shepherd for all of them. They shall follow my rules and faithfully obey my laws." Zephaniah 3, verse 13, "The remnant of Israel shall do no wrong, speak no falsehood. A deceitful tongue shall not be in their mouths." Zechariah 13:2 says, "In that day too, declares the God of hosts, I will erase the very names of the idols from the land. They shall not be uttered any more, and I will also make the prophets and the impure spirit," and the note on that is an impure spirit is abnormal human behavior, is the reference there. "I will make the impure spirit vanish from the land." Malachi chapter 3, verse 19, "For lo, that day is at hand, burning like an oven. All the arrogant and all the doers of evil shall be straw. And that day is coming, said God of hosts, shall burn them to ashes and leave them neither stock nor boughs." Isaiah 60, verse 21, "And your people, all of them righteous, shall possess the land for all time. They are the shoot that I planted, my handiwork in which I glory." Jeremiah 50, verse 20, "In those days and at that time, declares God, the iniquity of Israel shall be sought, and there shall be none. The sins of Judah, and none shall be found. For I will pardon those I allow to survive." The idea of world peace, again, all of these things that we're looking at here are things that must come to pass when the Mashiach is here. So among them, world peace. Isaiah chapter 2, verse 4, Thus God will judge among the nations and arbitrate for the many peoples, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not take up sword against nation. They shall never again know war. Micah chapter 4 verse 3 says pretty much the same thing. Hosea 2 verse 20, in that day I will make a covenant for them with the beasts of the field, the birds of the air, the creeping things of the ground. I will also banish bow, sword, and war from the land. Thus I will let them lie down in safety. Zechariah chapter 9, verse 10, he shall banish chariots from Ephraim and horses from Jerusalem. The warrior's bow shall be banished. He shall call on the nations to surrender, and his rule shall extend from sea to sea and from ocean to land's end. Isaiah 11, verse 6 and 65, verse 25. The wolf shall dwell with the lamb, the leopard lie down with the kid, the calf, the beast of prey, and the fatling together with a little boy to herd them. And the wolf and the lamb shall graze together, the lion shall eat straw like the ox, and the serpent's food shall be earth. In all my sacred mount nothing evil or vile shall be done, says God. And building the third and final temple, Ezekiel 37, verse 26. I will make a covenant of friendship with them. It shall be an everlasting covenant with them. I will establish them and multiply them. I will place my sanctuary among them forever. Ezekiel 40, also dealing with the third temple. The entire chapter is the third temple description. Isaiah 2, verse 2. In the days to come, the mount of God's house shall stand firm above the mountains. Also, we can look at the Talmud, Vayikra Rabbah 9:6, Bamidbar Rabbah 13:2, Shir Rabbah to the end of the chapter 4, Hilchot Melachim 11, verse 1, and 4:7. Messiah will gather the dispersed and return them to the land and to their tribe. Deuteronomy 30, verses 3 through 4. Then your God will restore your fortunes and take you back in love. God will bring you together again from all the peoples where your God has scattered you, even if your outcasts are at the ends of the world. From there, your God will gather you. From there, God will fetch you. Amos 9:14. I will restore my people Israel. They shall rebuild ruined cities and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and drink their wine. They shall till gardens and eat their fruits, and I will plant them upon their soil, never more to be uprooted from the soil I have given them, and said the eternal your God. Jeremiah 23:7. Assuredly a time is coming, declares God, when it shall no more be said, as God lives, who brought the Israelites out of the land of Egypt, but rather, as God lives, who brought out and led the offspring of the house of Israel from the northland and from all the lands to which I have banished them, and they shall dwell upon their own soil. Ezekiel 39:25, 20, 41, 42, 36, and verse 24. Assuredly, thus said the sovereign God, I will now restore the fortunes of Jacob and take the whole house of Israel back in love, and I will be zealous for my holy name when I bring you out from the peoples and gather you from the lands in which you are scattered. I will accept you as a pleasing odor. I will be sanctified through you in the sight of the nations. Then, when I have brought you to the land of Israel, to the country that I swore to give to your fathers, you shall know that I am God. I will take you from among the nations and gather you from all the countries, and I will bring you back to your own land. Isaiah 11, verse 12, 16, 43, Isaiah 43, verse 5 says, God will hold up a signal to the nations and assemble the banished of Israel and gather the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. All exiles were the result of Israel's loss of purpose. Prayer and study and teach the Talmud. I'm sorry, this is actually a separate. That was the end of the verse from Isaiah. But the commentary here is all exiles were the result of Israel's loss of purpose. Prayer and study and teach and teaching. The Talmud teaches exiles' purpose was to bring converts, the lost sheep of the house of Israel back. When Israel is whole together, doing what they are supposed to do, the world is whole. That's some commentary from Talmud. Also, continuing with looking at this mission, Isaiah 2, verses 2 through 3. In the days to come, the Mount of God's house shall stand firm above the mountains and tower above the hills, and all the nations shall gaze on it with joy. Next, the Messiah will teach truth in a way that is easily understood and believed. So the question here is, what is the most important truth that, if made known, would change everything? And that is simply that God exists. The Messiah will teach in such a way that there's no question of the truth, but we can still choose. It doesn't do away with free will. What if Torah was and is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? It's not that we were never supposed to eat of it, but we were supposed to wait until we had the ability to understand. Knowledge and understanding are two different things. That's the truth of the new covenant. There is only one tree. It will not be replaced. The covenant will not be replaced, or the tree. But come springtime, it's renewed with fruit. The so-called new covenant is the same as the so-called old covenant. It's just that we'll see it and learn it with understanding. This is another truth that the Messiah will teach us. And what about free will in all of this? Ezekiel 36:27 says, "And I will put my spirit," excuse me, I will put my spirit into you. Thus I will cause you to follow my laws and faithfully to observe my rules. So the next thing that is on the Messiah's agenda is to represent God to man and man to God. Isaiah 11:10, Isaiah 52:7 says, "In that day the stock of Jesse that has remained standing shall become a standard to peoples. Nations shall seek his counsel, and his abode shall be honored. How welcome on the mountain are the footsteps of the herald, announcing happiness, heralding good fortune, announcing victory, telling Zion, your God reigns." Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 14. "For the earth shall be filled with the awe for the glory of God as water covers the sea." Jeremiah 31:33. "But such is the covenant I will make with the house of Israel after these days, declares God. I will put my teaching into their innermost being and inscribe it upon their hearts. Then I will be their God, and they shall be my people." The next mission is the resurrection of the dead. And there are those that believe that this will happen immediately when the Messiah comes. There are those that believe that there'll be a partial resurrection of the dead immediately, and there are those that believe that the resurrection of the dead won't actually take place until the end of the 1,000 years of the Messianic reign. But at any rate, it's definitely prophesied to happen. Isaiah 26:19 says, "O let your dead revive, let corpses arise, awake and shout for joy, you who dwell in the dust. For your dew is like the dew on fresh growth. You make the land of the shades come to life." Ezekiel 37:12, "Prophesy therefore and say to them," talking about the bones, "Thus said the sovereign God, I am going to open your graves and lift you out of the graves, O my people, and bring you to the land of Israel." Daniel 12:2 says, "Many of those that sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to eternal life, others to reproaches, to everlasting abhorrence." That part of it is probably at the end of the 1,000 years. But at any rate, that's part of the resurrection of the dead. And last but not least, an end to disease and suffering and poverty. Isaiah 35, verse 5, 25, verse 8, 51, verse 3, and 61, verse 6 all have the idea of, quoting, "Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf shall be unstopped. Then the lame shall leap like a deer, and the tongue of the dumb shall shout aloud. Death will be destroyed forever. My sovereign God will wipe away the tears from all faces. Truly, God has comforted Zion, comforted all her ruins, made her wilderness like Eden, her desert like the garden of God. Gladness and joy shall abide there, thanksgiving and the sound of music. While you shall be called priests of God and termed servants of our God, you shall enjoy the wealth of nations and revel in their riches. Ezekiel 36, verse 29. And when I have delivered you from all your impurity, I will summon the grain and make it abundant, and I will not bring famine upon you. Amos 9:13 says, a time is coming, declares God, when the plower shall meet the reaper, and the treader of grapes the one who holds the bag of seed, when the mountains shall drip wine, and all the hills shall wave with grain. And also Eliyahu Rabbah in the Talmud, chapter 12, Midrash Tehillim 87:3. All of those deal with an end to disease, suffering, and poverty. So as you look at this list, there's a lot that the Messiah is supposed to do, and not supposed to, but will do. So if any of these things are missing from the world today, if any of these things are missing from the world today, the only conclusion is that the Messiah is not here. Okay? There's a saying, I think it's even a song, that everything will work out in the end, and if everything hasn't worked out, it's not the end. And that's what we're talking about in terms of the Messiah. We believe, but many other generations before us believed the same thing. But I definitely believe, and many others, that we are now in the final days, that the Messiah is about to appear. Imagine what kind of world. Imagine if it is imminent. Imagine that if many of us listening to this alive today will remain alive to see the Messiah, what a joyous time that will be. If it doesn't happen, it will happen, and we will be here to see it. In this life or in another, we will be here to see it. So that's really the good news. That is the good news, is the Messiah is coming. So that's been a look at who the Messiah will be and what the Messiah's mission will be. And I hope you've enjoyed that. We will take a look next at the why, and many interesting things to talk about there. So I hope you'll join me for the next class as we continue our class on awaiting Mashiach and looking at all aspects from a Jewish standpoint of what it is we're waiting, who it is we're waiting for, and what it is that they're supposed to do. So again, thanks for sharing your time with me. And look forward to seeing you and being with you in the next class. Remember, if you have comments or questions, please leave them in the comments section. You can also email me directly, but if you leave it in the comment section, then everyone can see it and comment on it if they want to, and I will certainly comment on it as well if I can. So please do that so we have some interaction going as we continue here in the classes. Meanwhile, thanks for being with me. Enjoy your time. Shalom.